Hi guys, learn with me while I create a digital clock. I watched a few tutorials on how to create a digital clock, and they were all mostly type what I type. So I didn't quite understand what I was typing, and I really wanted to understand what I was doing so that I could create a clock on my own. So I want to do this a little bit differently rather than just typing everything. I want to go over some of the things that I used to create a digital clock. So the first thing I want to go over is function. And a JavaScript function is a block of code designed to perform a particular task. So I come from a COBOL background, so I kind of compare that to using a subroutine, where you create the subroutine to perform a specific task rather than putting that task in every single piece of code. All you have to do is just call that subroutine. So I kind of correlate the two. It should take some input and return an output where there is some obvious relationship between the input and the output. For example, what we're going to be using, we're going to be calling I believe is a date function. And that date function is not something that we're creating. We're just calling it. It's already out there, but we're going to format the input a little bit. So a JavaScript function is executed when something calls it, and a function is a way to bundle code so that it can be reused. So like I said, kind of like subroutines if you come from a COBOL background. So another thing that I wasn't that familiar with because I'd never used that before is a method. JavaScript methods are actions that can be performed on objects. The getHours method returns the hour from 0 to 23 of the specified date and time. We're also going to use getMinutes, and we're going to use getSeconds. And that's going to return the minutes from 0 to 59 and the seconds also from 0 to 59. I'm also including some miscellaneous things. These are the ones that I kind of had a really hard time with. An object, I wasn't sure if an object was the same or different as a function, but JavaScript objects are containers for named values called properties or methods. So they're just kind of a container. And a constructor is a special type of subroutine called to create an object. It prepares the new object for use. So we're going to use new date. The new date constructor represents the current date and time as of the time of instantiation. So when we call it, we're going to get that current date and time, or when we use it. Okay? So inner HTML, which I do understand we are using it. The inner HTML property sets or returns the HTML content of an element. You're going to see me use these different things and talk about these different things as I go through creating a digital clock. So I'm going to use CodePen for this, and I tried it before in CodePen. It worked really well. What I'm going to do first in the HTML is just create a div and call it clock, and that's what we will use to call it from the JavaScript. Okay. And that's all you need for the HTML. Okay, and in the CSS, I'm going to set that up so it looks nice here. So I'm going to start with the div. I'm going to make the minimum height 100 pixels. Display flex, and I want this centered. Justify content center. And align items center. Okay, and that's all I need for the div. So now I'm going to grab that ID that I called clock. And the font family, I'm going to make sans serif. The font size, I'm going to use 5em. I think that will be good. And the color, I'm just going to make blue. Okay, and that's all you need for the CSS. You can change it and make it as nice as you want, but just for a simple clock, that was all I needed. So for the JavaScript, it's actually pretty simple once I went through and made sure I kind of understood everything. So I'm going to create a function, and I'm going to call it display time. And I'm going to keep everything inside here, but underneath I'm going to put display time so that I can actually see it as we're building it. Okay, so within this function, I'm going to create some variables. I'm going to call the first one date, and that's going to use the constructor of date. Right, and then I'm going to do hours, seconds, and minutes, and I'm going to use that method. Oops, sorry, that's date, and then get hours. And this will get all the hours between 0 and 23. That's how they would come back. So then the minutes. Okay, and this will return the minutes between 0 and 59. I'm going to make this just a little bit wider here. And then I'm going to get seconds. And this will also bring back the seconds between 0 and 59. I'm going to do one more variable, and we call it format, because I want my clock to be AM or PM. So I'm going to initialize it with AM. Okay, but I'm going to create an if statement. If hours greater than or equal to 12, and I want my format to say PM. So once the afternoon hits, instead of saying 1300 hours, I would want it to say 1 p.m. So in order to change that hours, I'm going to do a little math here. So if hours are greater than 12, then hours can equal hours minus 12. So if we get 13 back for the hour, 1300 would be 1 o'clock p.m. Then it would be the 13 minus 12, and it will say 1. And this here will cause it to flip to p.m. Okay. But if the hours come back as 0, that's midnight, and I don't want it to say 0, I would just make it say 12. Okay, so I'm going to set up the code to actually see the clock. So this is where we're using the inner HTML and our ID that we set up in our HTML. And I'm going to concatenate these together. So hours plus, and there's our 9. And I'm going to use a colon. I notice it's coming up black, so I'm going to check my CSS and make sure that I have that set up right. So hours plus, oops, plus, and we're going to do minutes, another colon, seconds, and then I'm going to do format. Aha, and I called it format up here. So let's fix that, and that should come up. There we go. Okay, so let's see why this came out black when I thought I put blue. Let me check my CSS here. Aha. There we go. Okay, my semicolon was missing. Okay, so there are a couple of things we see happening here. First, I want each section to be double digits. So we're going to have to add a string of a 0 if it's less than 10. And also it's just stuck here. It did one call. So first, let's use the set interval to call it every second. Okay, and now we see it's making this call every second. 1,000 milliseconds equals 1 second. So it's going to do this call every second. And the current time is 9:55. Okay, and the last thing I want to do is make this a 09. So I'm going to create another function. I'm going to put it above this. And I'm going to call it add 0. And what this is going to do is string a 0 to the number if it's less than 10. And I have to use a string because if you use a number, it's just going to drop again. Okay. And I'm going to use that with each one so that hours you should see change as soon as I add that here. There we go. And now it says 0. Okay. And we're going to do it for the minutes. And the seconds. Oh my. My typing today. There we go. Okay. So now we have the 09, 57, 19, and it is in the AM. So one thing I want to verify, I want to make sure that this works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my hours to, let's see, 13. Hours equals 13. That's 12. And it should come out as 1. There we go. 0, 1, and PM. So that would change it to 1. And I want to check and see what happens when it's midnight. It should come back with a 12. There we go. So at midnight, it would say 12, and it would flip to AM. I'm going to take this out. And that's all you need to do to create a very simple digital clock. I will add this to my collection and link to it below if you would like to see how I did it. And you can modify this and make it as nice as you want, spaces out if you want, add a background if you want. But this is just a very simple demonstration of how to create a digital clock. And I hope that the explanations at the beginning were helpful to you. Again, as I was going through and learning how to do this, I didn't quite understand everything, so I had to do some research on those. I will leave the links below as far as what I used. And if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and please subscribe for more. Let me know if you have any suggestions on how to make this better or more simply. And if there's anything you would like to see me try, add that below. Thanks. Bye.